Thank you everyone in the audience for your patience. I'm going to just start to do the back of house promotions of the applicant team for today's item. So you can all just hang tight while I do that and wait also for the rest of the DRC to join. We'll get rolling shortly.
Hi, this is Chris from OTJ.
Hey, Chris. So I'm promoting Carrie and James and Dion. Is there anyone else here that I should be promoting for the item?
I believe that Katrina is here from Presidio Bay Ventures.
I'm not seeing her in the list. Katrina, if you are here and could raise your hand, that would be great. I think I see.
We have James Stockham also.
Yep.
And we may have Melinda from BKF as well. We brought the full complement.
Great. Okay, is anyone else in the audience here on the applicant team for 2400 Charleston? If so, raise your hand. Okay, I think KS, you must be Katrina.
And Madison DiNapoli may be joining as well.
She is. She's running a few moments late. She'll
Okay.
get here when she can.
Okay, I'll try to split my attention on.
She's gonna join me here, so she'll sit in this room when she gets here.
Okay, great. So let's see. I think we are all here then on the DRC side. So with that, I just will welcome everyone to the Development Review Committee meeting of January 18th. A quick rule of order. I'm just going to read the required agenda language regarding the fact that during this declared state of emergency, this meeting is being conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E as authorized by resolution of the City Council. You can contact the city clerk at city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution, which allows all members of the DRC to participate in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Also, just by way of information, this will be the particularly for any folks in the audience who are regular attendees of the DRC meetings, this will be our last virtual DRC meeting with advisory board meetings returning to in-person status in February. So with that, a quick roll call. And Deputy Zoning Administrator Rebecca Shapiro, I chair the DRC. I'm joined by two consulting architects, Linda Poncini and Emily Jones, who are both here with me today. On today's agenda, we have one project, which is 2400 to 2700 Charleston Road. And we'll kick off that item in just a moment, just for everyone's information as well. We'll handle this item like we do all items at DRC with an opportunity for the applicant team to do a brief presentation on their proposed project design. Then we'll follow that with an opportunity for anyone in the audience who would wish to ask questions or provide design feedback to do so during a public comment period. And then we will bring it back to the DRC for discussions and recommendations. So with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant team for this project, which is a proposal to construct site and building improvements associated with conversion of pre-existing warehouse retail spaces to office R&D use in an existing multi-tenant center. So take it away.
Great. I'll go first. My name is Katrina. I'm with Presidio Bay Ventures. I'm the owner's representative. I'm the design and construction manager for Charleston Plaza, the proposed project. I'll be overseeing the project on the design and construction through completion of the project. We will have also Madison DiNapoli joining us in a few moments. She's our development manager she oversees kind of the entitlement and financial aspects of the project. A little bit about PBB. We are a commercial real estate investment firm focused on the Bay Area. We specialize in commercial and residential kind of mixed use projects in the Bay Area. We have quite a bit of life science, residential, and then, like we said, mixed use with some retail components in our portfolio. We also have about 5 lab buildings currently under us that we're developing, entitling, and building. So we've got quite a bit of expertise in the design and construction of these types of facilities. We're very excited to breathe some new life into this project at this retail center. It's kind of a nice adaptive reuse, mixed use approach that we're taking to this project. With that, I'll turn it over to our architect, OTJ. We have Chris and Guy on the line, and then we also have the Gazzardo Partnership on the phone, our landscape architect, and we have James representing OTJ today. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Let me share my screen here. All right, can everybody see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we're really excited to share this project with you and get your feedback. We certainly consider this to be a conversation and discussion, so please let us know if you have any questions along the way or any feedback. We're more than happy to kind of pause and talk things over as we go. Today's agenda, we're going to start with the existing context. We're going to look a little bit at the site location, the existing buildings, and the neighborhood context. We're then going to move into the architectural development, the site strategy, the materiality, and the elevation design, and also some of the coordination that we went through with the planning department. And then we're going to transition into landscape development with the site concept, the linear park placemaking, and the pedestrian circulation design. So the first, getting off into the existing context, you can see that our site is toned here in red. We're at a really interesting location, kind of a pivot point between a number of different zones. So we have existing tech campuses to the north, toned in blue. We have residential toned in yellow to the west. And then we're surrounded by light industrial and retail around the site. You can see that we're bounded on the north by the 101, and then on the south by Charleston Road. And then you can see this black line, we're actually right on the border of Mountain View and Palo Alto. So there's a very small portion, parking only, of our site, which is straddling that line and actually part of Palo Alto. So this is zooming in a little bit more into our site in particular. The total site area is just about 10 acres. It's comprised of 3 buildings currently on the site. We have the 3 buildings, which we're going to be considering M1, M2, and M3 as we move through the presentation. They're existing big box stores. They are currently vacant. They're 108,000 square feet. Then we have what we're calling M4, which is existing PetSmart. This building is occupied. It has a tenant and is currently active, 27,500 square feet. And then we also have retail down here along Charleston, which has active tenants, 9,750 square feet. You can see that surrounding, we have actually a Costco just to the south of us. Again, that 101 is bounding us. There's really high visibility on the 101 from Charleston Road. It's an interesting scenario in that we're set back about 500 feet from Charleston. So not typical in that most of the light industry and retail is up against the main Charleston Road. So a little bit of a buffer between Charleston and the actual project itself. So this is the current state of the buildings. Again, M1, M2, M3 along the top. We have a former Bed Bath & Beyond, a former Best Buy, and REI. You can see that there's a lot of exaggerated articulation here, very typical of retail typology. This is from Charleston, and then on the bottom, this is the highly visible north facade from the 101. Again, you can see articulation that's really meant to break apart the volumes, expressed in that way, painted different colors. So in all of that, adaptive reuse project is actually perfect for us. These large format buildings, they offer large floor plates. for life science use. They have high ceilings for a variety of tenants that need that height. There's space for MEP infrastructure. And then also very clearly, there's an abundance of parking, which is great for us and actually perfect in that we can reduce some of that parking and give it back to the project in the form of amenity space and connective areas that form a campus between the life science uses and the existing retail uses. Zooming in a little bit more, just on some of the different conditions. This is along Charleston. This is actually the entry into the project currently. The intersection of Charleston Independence. You can see that the project is there in the background, but there is a substantial buffer of landscape and parking area. And there is a little bit of retail that's fronting that Charleston Road. In the back, again, highly visible, the existing condition, vacant big box store use. And then some of the in-between around the building. So we're 30 feet or so from the property line. There is area for emergency circulation and other kind of back of house functions. But you can see some of the typical conditions that we face with articulated stucco boxes painted. Around the building, like we said, it's light industrial and retail uses. We have a Costco across the street. Also across the street are retail uses like Michael's and other small retail outlets. There's also a mix of 1- and 2-story light industrial and commercial buildings. So our building fits rather nicely in terms of the scale and the height with these 1- to 2-story buildings that are surrounding us. And we'll get a little bit into the architectural development of the project itself. So this is the site plan. I think the most important thing for us when we're looking at this project and plan is to create a true mixed use project, one that reimagines the commercial into life science, but also retains that existing retail that's there currently with M4 and R1 and creates a project that encompasses all of the uses. And doing that, like I had mentioned earlier, we're able to reduce a little bit of the parking and create these areas of connectivity. So we're creating, we're calling the Central Park, which is out front of the M2, M3 buildings, which is a collaborative and gathering space that can be used by tenants as well as visitors for M4 and R1. There's also very generous landscape areas that are leading to the buildings, and then also areas that serve as a bit of an entryway or a gateway into the project with seating and opportunities for people to gather and to use basically the whole project itself. You're seeing some of the circulation diagrams here. So we are encouraging new pedestrian and bike paths into the project. So the green arrow is bike, so you can come straight into the project. There's ample area to park outside, but each building also contains bike rooms inside to encourage that parking, that bike parking. We have the pink, which is vehicular parking, and so basically that circulation comes in, and then we immediately want that vehicular circulation to move into the parking areas and free up that area down the central spine. And then also encouraging pedestrians to walk in, gather at the Central Park and then enter into the buildings. So this is a main aerial image of the project. We were just looking at it in plan. Here it is in 3D. One of the most important parts of this project is the adaptive reuse or the sustainable story. So literally what we're doing is we're stripping it down to the essential structure. So the existing buildings take a CMU structure and then add a bunch of furring on top of it. We're basically taking it down to that structure. And one of the big things you'll notice are all of the windows. So of course, punching new openings, which allow light for the new lab function inside, but also creates an approachability. So people that are parking and are utilizing the space can see into the buildings. There's that connection between the Central Park, the interior itself. So a lot of reasons for punching holes and allowing light and views into and from the buildings. Going back to the adaptive reuse, what's really important is that by retaining all of the existing walls or most of the walls, we're really reducing the amount of carbon or offsetting the carbon emissions that are associated with demo and taking demo waste to storage and so forth. So really trying to embrace that adaptive reuse, retain as much of the existing structure as possible, and then using that as a story to further the project. So what we're looking at here is a strategy of adding windows, adding light, and also embracing the innate horizontality of the building. So instead of trying to go higher and incorporating pieces of articulation that are more or less double story, what we're doing is we're cutting the building horizontally and allowing for articulation at that pedestrian level. So at the pedestrian scale, there's articulation, and then above that, we're incorporating a facade of various textures, scales, and colors in order to add identity and interest. So you can see here, we're wanting to use a color that has a little bit of warmth, a little bit of approachableness, instead of a more cool or gray color. We're going with this this kind of rusty brown color, which we think will fit well with the existing context, and also just lead to a more rich and kind of vibrant take on the buildings themselves. We're really utilizing light and shadow to the fullest degree. And then you can see that we have landscape elements that fit really well with the building. So although we're using that horizontal nature of the building, all of the landscape elements actually have a rolling or mounded effect. So we're contrasting that more rigid typology to the building with a softer rolling nature with the landscape. You can also see the integration of sails and shading elements. We are facing south, and so it does get quite intense, quite hot on the site. And so allowing those areas of refuge, of respite, allowing for collaboration in these areas, and just kind of linking that idea and that typology through the entry from this entry portion or the gateway into the central park itself. Zooming in a little bit more on the actual materials themselves, we're going to be utilizing a concrete wainscot. So we're going to use the existing structure, which is CMU, but at the base level, we're going to use some areas where we're going to enhance the finish by using a concrete wainscot so that you have that really raw and a real feeling of concrete at the base level. Of course, we're going to retain some of the stucco, but we will be painting and enhancing the color of that. We're going to be using wood or some kind of composite wood siding on some of the elements of the buildings, especially at the entry portals, so that at that pedestrian level, you have a really tactile, a very real material that's approachable and soft, and that just creates a more of a connection with that natural Central Park area out front. This is a project that we're kind of using this coloring for this project. So you can see that it actually changes color quite a bit in different daylighting conditions. So in shadow, it has a little bit more of a muted rust or brown tone. And then in direct sunlight, it has this very vibrant kind of core 10 rusty appearance. So we think that contrast is going to be really nice, especially facing south and how the sun moves across the project to have that varying degree of sun, light, and shadow. Here are some examples of the materials that we're going to be using. We have different scales of metal panel. These, again, are arrayed along horizontally. And so we have that change of texture as we move to the next datum line, but we're still utilizing the same material, just a different scale of that material. M2 utilizes a slightly different metal panel. So this uses an ACM panel, which is more smooth. It has kind of a standing seam effect. So a different scale, slightly different appearance, and we think it will give M2 its own unique identity. We're also utilizing corrugated metal. This will be up at the mechanical screens. And then we're also using potentially perforated metal fins that help to diffuse the light coming into the building as a way to allow for sun shading, but at the same time allow for views out and just this kind of dappling effect of lighting coming in. A couple of architectural features, examples that we're going to be using, storefront and curtain wall systems. So we'll have large expanses of glass like we talked about before. We're going to be utilizing lip frames around the windows to give added depth and a little bit of a shadow line. And then also adding wood to the canopies, again, for that kind of tactile nature at the pedestrian level. I wanted to bring up just a quick example of some of the collaboration that we had with planning as we were moving through this. So, you know, we got some feedback, overall very positive feedback about the southern facade of the project. And we got comments about how maybe M2 wanted to have its own unique identity apart from M1. We thought this was an excellent comment, and that we thought was you know, very worthwhile to tackle and see if we could bring something that added to the project, that added that unique identity to M2. These buildings are all, you know, stuck together. And so I think, you know, creating that slight difference, even though we're utilizing the same materials, but at a different scale, is really important to give a little bit of variety and identity to the building. So we gave a few different options, and ultimately one was chosen that added a little bit more glazing to the upper datum level of M2. And we used that to kind of progress into an idea of utilizing small mullion-based fins and then a little bit of fritting to add texture, still allow all that light to come in from the south, but to add interest through different treatments on the glass and mullions. So this is the southern facade of the project. Below you can see existing, above is the proposed facade. Really what we tried to do is keep all of the entries, all of the openings in the exact same places. You can tell from the existing condition that really the only openings are for the entries. Again, big box stores, no need for natural light. A little bit of skylighting on the roof, but really these are the elements that you have to emit light. What we did is we utilized those, but expanded greatly upon them. So we opened up the walls to bring in natural light. There's added structural response that we need to work on in order to achieve that perforation. But again, utilizing all of the walls as much as possible for this adaptive reuse idea and direction. So you can see, again, breaking apart the building horizontally, we have that concrete wainscoting at the base, metal panel at that second datum level up, and then at the parapet switching to a finer scale metal panel. That way we're introducing interest at each level and breaking it apart rather than using like a volume effect. Rather, we're using material and different combinations to bring interest and depth to the project. Here's a rendering of the project from Charleston. So you can see, again, we're set pretty far back. We have a nice landscape buffer between the project and the road, but you can see it back here, very low profile. The mechanical roofs are just visible at this point. As you get closer to the building, the mechanical screens actually go away. We've placed them very central to the buildings so that visibility is very minimally impacted, and that they basically are only visible when you're this far away from the building. As you get closer, they disappear. As you enter the project, this is M3 on the corner, which is the former REI building. We're really using this as the showpiece, the identity of the project. These openings are all existing. So we're just utilizing the existing openings, framing out a new entry portal that emphasizes that entry, creating a canopy to assist just with identification of the entry. And then you can see, again, utilizing those different scales of metal panel, in this case, bringing it all the way to the ground. So different buildings are utilizing the materials in slightly different ways, again, adding interest and identity to each. This is from the other side. M3 is in the background here. M1 is in the foreground. You can see again the long ribbon windows allowing light in. M1 has a mezzanine level, so all of this mezzanine is very accessible to people working inside. Again, getting that light and views out to the central park in front. You can see the shading canopies and the wood portals at the entries. You can see that there is a difference between M1 and M2 in terms of the size of the panel. M2 is again utilizing the same kit of parts in terms of the windows, lip frames, entry portal, but now we have a different scale of metal panel, and it's also again coming to the ground, which is a little bit different than M1. And then zooming in a little bit more, now we're looking really at the placemaking of the landscape. So we have the hard lines of the architecture, we have the rolling mounding hills of the landscape, and you have the shading devices in between that allow for open collaboration, activity, linking this portion to the retail, and really inviting people to use this space and make it an active place. We have a couple of other elevations around the building. This is the west elevation, so it's not super visible from the parking lot. It's around the corner, but we still wanted to wrap the main facade around to make sure that we're completing the idea, and then we're utilizing some steps and raises of the parapet in order to define different volumes and break up that long kind of ubiquitous volume, but also adding lots of windows. So this is all at ground level. At the second level, we stop the windows at this point because the roof does start to slope down all the way to the north. So it would be cutting across windows if we put them higher up on the building. But we are adding as many windows as possible for natural light. This is the north elevation. So this is the elevation that's adjacent to 101. We're adding windows, again, similar to the other facades, in order to allow for air, not air, but light to come in from the north. You can also see that instead of some of these volumes that are existing, we've stripped it back, but utilized the existing bump outs, but brought some of that metal panel from the south facade onto the north. Again, there's that continuity of facades, but also this kind of serves as wayfinding, identification that this is something special from the 101, that there's something unique happening here. And this is, I think this color and this metal panel will serve as identity for the building itself. Here's a rendering from the 101. So again, you can see some of the windows that we're adding. We are going to be painting and upgrading the stucco finish to the north facade. There's already an existing landscape buffer that's quite lush. So the building will actually be poking up above the landscape, and you'll be able to see these 3 volumes that represent M1, M2, M3. Then this is the east facade of the building. This is directly adjacent to M4, the PetSmart. So we are again wrapping that metal panel around the corner. You'll see in the next slide that we're utilizing this panel in M4 as well to have that connection between new life science and existing retail, and really form kind of a cohesive idea for the campus. So here is M4 PetSmart. PetSmart is active. There is a tenant. They will be in the building while we're working on M1, M2, and M3. So we wanted to be delicate in how much we affect their facade, but at the same time, wanting to make sure that, again, this is a campus, this is a collective, this is a whole. We're not splitting it between lab and retail sides. We're wanting this to be a cohesive site and property. So you can see that we have the metal panel that's reaching across onto the PetSmart. We are upgrading and painting all of the stucco finishes, but we're taking that existing canopy, lightening it up so that it's much more in line with what's happening across at the other 3 buildings, and then incorporating that wood texture as well. So that way you have more of a connection. They're more like siblings rather than distant cousins at this point. And then here's a rendering You can see that entry canopies, you enter through, and then you have that connection between life science and retail. And again, we have enhanced all of the pavement so that there is that connection and free flow across. Again, we really see this as a true mixed use project. So this is a pet store, but that R1 that's closer to Charleston is retail in the sense that it has restaurants and other services. So we're really looking for the tenants of these buildings to support those uses as well on the same site. And landscape. James, if you'd like to take it.
Great. Thank you,
And
Chris.
James, I apologize. I'm just going to ask in the interest of time, because the presentation's been a little bit on the longer side, if you could keep it a little bit more brief so we can get the public comment and discussion, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yep, sure. I'll summarize as best as I can. Looking at the plan as a whole, adaptive reuse from a site and campus creation standpoint is inherently a sustainable approach. So we're going to take advantage of existing trees where we can. We worked with the city forestry to save most of the trees. There will be no existing heritage trees removed. Approximately 50 new trees planted, a majority of them being California natives for much needed shade. So I think Chris touched a lot on the Central Park and some of the wayfinding elements that are weaved throughout the site. Let's just go to the character images, Chris. Let's do this. This goes into the softening that Chris talked about, that contrast with the strong lines of the architecture and how we're going to soften it with naturalized planting and topography to also help buffer the parking area and embrace different amenity spaces that we'll be carving out of this. Go ahead, Chris. And then we'll certainly plan to showcase California natives with mosaics of grasses and shrubs for habitat, texture, and color. Go ahead. Again, the Central Park. So it serves as a plaza for the campus as a whole, but also using planting and some of the sinuous lines of the layout to carve out areas that each individual building could use. Go ahead. And the linear park serves as a respite along the circulation routes from Charleston, as gathering and gateway functions, leads the public and tenants throughout the site with accent paving and different wayfinding elements. Go ahead. And this touches a little bit on some of the workshops that we did with DRC on developing this area. We think it's nicely amenitized now. It has similar tensile structures that are bolstered with a little more formality. And it has a California native grove and some art moments. Go ahead. And for the last, we did a workshop on pedestrian circulation, how to strengthen that, and developing paving patterns that highlight the pedestrian movement to the center of the site and ties kind of the main plaza paving and how those exciting bands might get turned. So there's some directionality. So on the far right there is the scheme that we landed on. That was quick.
Thanks, James.
Yeah.
Definitely
Thanks.
made up for my long-winded approach.
No worries. But with that, I will turn to our short but mighty attendee list right now. I see one hand raised already, but for anyone else in the audience who's participating and is interested in speaking, please raise your hand now using the raise hand function of Zoom. I don't believe anyone's participating by phone, but if you are, you can use *9 to raise your hand, and then when called upon, *6 to unmute yourself. So with that, our first speaker will be Bruce England.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bruce England here, speaking for Mountain View Coalition for Sustainable Planning and Green Spaces Mountain View. This looks like a good project, but we do have a couple of comments we'd like to make. One has to do with the number of windows, and I understand that it sounds like you want to do that to have the natural lighting, especially from the south. However, there is risk of exposing too much light to the outside, which can compromise wildlife and also exacerbate energy use. So we hope that you will take that into account and also trust that the windows are bird safe, adequately bird safe. I think that's actually a requirement for a project, so that part's fine. And then this might go beyond DRC, but I'm just going to bring it up anyway. The linear park sections in the parking lot, that's great. I mean, the more trees and the more pedestrian friendly infrastructure, the better. However, it appears to be kind of cut off. It's sort of in the middle of the parking lot and then cut off from the rest of the greenery in front of the buildings. Maybe that could be remedied by just accenting the gap in between the two so that people don't feel like they're isolated in the middle of the parking lot. I'm sure you've thought of these things, but we just wanted to mention that we noticed it and wanted to comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Next up, Yasmin, if you're still interested, or Jasmine, if you're still interested in speaking, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I will bring the deliberations back to the DRC. All right. Seeing no more raised hands. Hand is up again. So Jasmine or Yasmin, you should be able to speak right now.
Oh, okay, thank you. Just a very quick comment about the area in the sort of primary drive to the buildings. So where you have shading on both sides of the driveway. Just suggesting that's a little bit too exposed for people to see it, maybe a little bit of separation there with some sort of clever planting. It's just a very little comment there, but otherwise I thought it was pretty interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll bring it back to the panel. Chris or whomever is controlling the slide deck for the OTJ team, if you could maybe bring up one of the overview site plans, I think that would be a great place to start, as we do typically start with a site plan discussion. I will say, I believe you were kind of rushing your submittal a little bit after the holidays to try to meet submittal deadlines for this meeting. But one big picture note just to make is to ensure, out of this meeting and as you proceed towards your final public hearings on this project, to make sure that plans are thoroughly scrubbed to remove inconsistencies across sort of various architectural, landscaping, and civil sheets. It avoids confusion as far as folks who are looking at materials ahead of the final public hearings, but also avoids confusion when you're reaching the building permit stage. And we don't want to be scrubbing our memories for which is the right proposal. So so that's just a big picture reminder as we move out of this meeting today. I guess Emily and Linda, I think one of the things that we're observing in the plan is a little bit of what a couple of our attendees picked up on, which is there is this sort of slight disconnect as the sort of paving plan, the special paving plan, has evolved in what's happening in front of M1 through 3 and what's happening on the entry drive. And I know a lot of that so you've arrived at the current strategy through feedback from staff about trying to make sure that where pedestrian crossings occur, that they're really clearly delineated to create a safe and a walking environment as possible. But I think what we've ended up with is something that feels a little bit incongruous, and as far as the paving condition along that linear entry drive and park area, and what's happening in front of the renovated units, the adapted reuse units. So while as a whole we're supportive of and want you to continue to work to make sure those pedestrian crossing locations are really strongly delineated and differentiated, we do think that more of that sort of special paving treatment, that sort of sinuous or circular accent element, needs to be brought back into and around the entry drive, particularly starting with that first on-site intersection through the second one closer to the buildings. One observation I had on my own is I think that one of the things you're grappling with is how to integrate the crossings or integrate while differentiating the crossings and the paving pattern. And I do wonder whether the way you've staged sort of these sort of the angular striping is making it a little bit more challenging to devise crossings and other special paving that feels more integrated. So you might want to look sort of give another look at your striping pattern to see if adjustments to that lead to opportunities for more integrated paving as you come into the linear entry drive. But that's our sort of major observation and recommendation for that pedestrian entry zone and linear park improvements. Could you also, while we're at it, zoom in a little bit more into the seating areas along the entry drive that the public commenter touched on? And I know we're looking at kind of like a macro sort of a macro plan, but James, could you speak to what the landscape strategy is around there because I can't imagine that you weren't thinking about how to make these areas comfortable for users.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think there's a layer of wanting to preserve these existing trees as well. So the goal is to be able to have as much canopy as possible and buffering those planting areas. So that was a big consideration. So whatever the interface of occupied area and parking existed, it was our goal to have as much planting. And it's not a major area to do a lot of topography, but we'll do as much as we can and do the rest with planting.
Okay, yeah, and we're not looking at the detailed planting plans, but it does look like you have some buffer areas there, and so just be deliberate with very tight planting that doesn't limit visibility when you get to those intersection points, but provides very tight and buffer and comfort to the usable areas.
Yeah.
I would also say that I think another thing to just continue to refine a little bit further is how the canopies are situated around and above some of the seating areas. I know these are more schematic drawings, but it seems a bit like the canopies do a lot of shading of landscape and or walking areas and aren't as sort of as well covering of some of the seating areas. I know some of that the coverage you're trying to create from the higher canopy trees, but I think there's some tweaking of the actual structures that you could do to make them a little bit better integrated with the locations where you actually have tables and chairs proposed.
You're right. There's a finer grain shade study that needs to be done. So right now we're sort of aiming for a noon delivery to capture these seating areas. Yeah.
Right. Two final small notes, which are things that the staff had identified to me is, one, I think one of the incongruities that we noted was location of vehicle security gates based on some of the, the workshop options you'd presented to staff. So, please make sure that those are correctly reflected in the drawings to be, sitting behind the architectural elements along the front of the buildings and low profile spec. Similarly, although this is not something that DRC typically weighs deeply into, our planning and public works staff have recommended that you continue to work with them on the location of the interior secure bike parking rooms to make sure that they are easily accessible to the main building entrances in particular. we're always looking, we're always striving to make those sorts of facilities as accessible as possible. So this is certainly something that the DRC supports, even though it's not as sort of central to the architecture and site design feedback that we typically provide. I think most of what we wanted to talk with you today about was in the building design, and I guess Emily or Linda, do you want to kick us off? I think generally we were reacting positively to the concept, but do have some areas where we have questions or recommendations to drive things just a bit further. Emily, I think you had some, or Linda, you had some thoughts on kind of the front in relationship to the back and how we might treat maybe M2 in a slightly different way.
Sure. If you don't mind, Linda, I'm happy to kick it off. Thanks for the presentation, guys. I think there's a lot of really thoughtful work happening here, and I applaud the project for their adaptive reuse approach, working within existing openings and transforming a more auto-focused place into a place that is more pedestrian friendly. I think there's a lot of really nuanced, great design decisions here. So I'm new to the project. I wasn't here for the last round, but I do see a lot of really great maneuvers at the pedestrian scale. Chris, you talked about making the building more approachable. And I think when we look at just the next click of development on the M2 facade, I think I question the idea that, because we all know that glazing, big expanses of glazing, while it's great for the people inside, isn't often as visually penetrated from the outside. And I think that another way, meaning that it can be very reflective, and I don't think it necessarily always communicates approachability. So I think you could think about developing this fritting and the mullion system in a way that it gives material scale and articulation that can also be approachable. You don't necessarily have to see in, but by getting that fine scale granularity that I think you're already developing, you're adding an approachability to the project that's in line with your kind of textural strategy throughout the rest of the project. And I think the team before we met, we think you're doing a lot of really elegant things facing the new landscape plaza that you call the Central Park. But when you look at the north facade facing 101, while there are some you're cleaning up a lot of what the building, the kind of more auto-focused existing building does, it does still seem a little bit blank. I understand that there are only certain places you can put windows, but fundamentally this is no longer a big box store that needs loading on the back, right? So how does this building become more human scaled accessible from this view? I still see a lot of kind of high contrast volumes, which tie to the materiality of the other side of the project, but don't really have the same nuanced scalar relationships that you're deploying on the landscape side. So I think there could be a little bit more thought to some of what's great on the south onto the north facade.
Yeah, I think that this rendering shows precisely what Emily's talking about. There's only one of these projecting elements that has windows in it. And I think it would really benefit you to do a real intense study of where you could introduce more windows, so that it helps to break up these masses, and also makes it more clear that this building is an R&D building now, that these buildings are R&D buildings. They aren't big box stores anymore. And I think that's important to realize that the roof level does go up and down, but it needs this needs further study to see if you can't introduce more windows into that elevation facing 101. Then you realize that the character of the building is more appropriate for the use that's inside of it, I guess is the best way to put it. So that's one of the concerns that we had.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you're right. You want the outside to reflect what's inside. Completely agree. And we appreciate that. And actually, it's only M1 and M3 that have second levels. So that's why M2 doesn't have that. It's actually just one tall space on the inside. But completely agree. And we'll look at what we can do for this north facade.
And even if it's possible, and again, I don't know, but if it's possible to add any windows at that first floor, especially in M2, just thinking of how an R&D building might be configured internally, maybe it's going to have a central courtyard, who knows, when you get right down to it. But the idea of being able to have workspaces around the perimeter of that, since it doesn't have end spaces, in walls that could have more glass. So I think a way of getting more natural light into the building would be important for that as well.
Yeah, and again, I think going back to Emily's original summary, and building on what Linda was saying, if there are opportunities to get additional windows in there, it's a great boon for future users, but also we're thinking about this as far as the presence that these buildings will have towards the freeway, and unlike retail that has such loading back of house focused needs, not that life science doesn't have any of that, but there's greater opportunity and I would imagine sort of greater desire to create an architectural presence on the freeway. It's a different face of the project, and you'll be opposite some new development in North Bay Shore that's going to be pretty special. So windows are a great opportunity, but we'd also again encourage you, as Emily I think was noting, there's textural and other detailed elements from your front facade treatments that might be able to play some role, particularly maybe for M2, to the extent that the interior might not as easily support some of the glazing solutions that Linda touched on, that we'd encourage you to look at to give this more more foresight design focus and highway presence.
Right, and there's many of the features that you can pull around to these elevations so that it is a cohesive design expression all the way around the building. I think that's important. I just wanted to ask a question, I think, on the site plan, and probably the rendering is fine. But and I do like what you're doing up against the building. I think that's very creative and very nice. I was a little struck by the appearance of the site plans that makes it look like the existing trees are really large and lush. They really aren't. And just wonder what the plan is to try to encourage those trees to thrive. There are, unfortunately, they look like they're struggling. And what is the plan for making sure that those become as large a canopy as your new trees?
Yeah, that's a valid point. And initially we had proposed removing them, especially in that sort of central area. And the forestry wasn't as keen on that. And we share your sentiment. They're sort of stunted by the classic little 90s diamonds that they're placed in.
Right.
I think we can have some hope that especially in the central area there, we'll be removing a lot of paving and parking that was surrounding them, and they'll now be surrounded in these linear planting areas up against the gathering spaces. So there's some hope there that they'll have a lot more permeability around them, planting area.
Well, I would encourage you, anything you can do to help, because it does make a big difference when you look at the renderings with the beautiful trees.
Yeah.
Which I'm concerned that what's out there is struggling so much that it's going to defeat some of your concept of this lush green surrounding these buildings. I just wanted to bring that up. On the materials for the building, I think you have some nice materials. They're the way the wood siding is presented, it seems that that you might be looking at options that are real wood, not real wood, various materials that perhaps you're considering, I don't know, or composite panels. But I think it's going to be important to provide real samples to staff, and I'm sure staff will look closely at this as to how it's really going to come off and what it's going to look like. Because as we know, some systems are much better than others in terms of how they look, how they last over time, and the feeling that you get from that material. The other thing I wanted to mention was, as we all know, looking at different screens, and I have 2 screens that I'm looking at right now, the colors look so different on one screen than another. And again, that's what's going to be really important with the sample boards that you provide to staff. And as you go forward with the project, I think that my initial reaction in looking at my small screen was that the color palette looked fairly gray and a little cold. But when I look on my large screen, it's very warm, and I think it looks very good. I also like the some of those examples that you showed, the photograph of how these panels, how the finish on the panels changes when the light hits it differently. And that was something, thank you for explaining that I was very pleased to hear that, because what it does as the sun hits it is very attractive. And so as you go forward developing your final palette of materials and color, I think it will be important for staff to review all that with you and be sure that it's giving the right feeling of what you're trying to do with the building. And I think that was about all on my comments.
I guess one quick question, Emily and Linda. One of the the questions we'd pondered was how far is far enough for giving and sort of what are the right levers to pull for looking at M2, and the applicant team sort of highlighted the options that it considered, and I think we're narrowing in on I think what they showed us was a mix of irregularly spaced fins with frit associated with that. Based on the description they provided on the color, is there a feeling that sort of a lightening of M2 isn't necessary, and really what they need to lean in on is further study of that pattern of fins and frit to create a little bit more texture and lightness?
Yeah, I think from my take after hearing Chris present, the project relies heavily on scale and texture and shade and shadow. And so I think the strategy as it stands is a great direction. I do, if you go to page 11, I wanted to look at kind of the 5th facade for a second too, Rebecca, because you mentioned, we should think about this in 4 sides, and we talked about the mechanical screen. And how life science often the equipment is even larger than in our experience 12 feet presents. This roofscape is really critical to how you perceive your project, especially as you're thinking about shifting the paradigm from this kind of the big box overly articulated faux skyline to something that is more horizontal in read, which I think is successful but still differentiates place. I wonder if maybe your mechanical screening strategy takes a lighter color that's more akin to the sky, and takes it out of the kind of warm brown tones, so that those masses, as they become more real, maybe in their size and their organization, don't detract from what you're doing on the other facades. But definitely up for discussion.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we were continuing to wonder, and I know you've heard this from the applicant team has heard this from me before, is, the other question we had, particularly as Emily had mentioned, she sometimes experiences even taller mechanical equipment enclosures for life science, and sort of anticipating that's a possibility that it might need to change here is whether there is still further opportunity to modify the equipment layouts so that you can integrate those mechanical screens with other building forms, like those volumes you have on the rear facade, as well, and wonder if the applicant team can speak to that.
It's possible. I think the last time we talked about this, what we were concerned about doing that, if we were to, for instance, just as a hypothetical, if we were to take the mechanical equipment from this location of M2 and put it over onto this, honestly, it's dead zone underneath. This is all furred out. There's nothing there. But if you were to combine these together, you're actually taking that volume and you're putting it closer to the perimeter of the building. So in essence, what you're doing is you're actually making it more visible than less. So although you are, I guess, centralizing the volume, you're making it bigger. So our take on it was to put the mechanical screens at the center of the project. So essentially, when you're at more or less the center of the parking, they become very, very minimal from eye level. Really, it's only when you get out to Charleston that they become even partially, sticking out of the top of the building. So we just think the closer that you move the mechanical screen to the perimeter, the more visible it becomes and the more volume, the heavier the building becomes actually. So, that was our take on it. It is maybe possible to move the M1 mechanical so that it's butting up against the second level portion of M1. That's a possibility, but functionally it seemed like putting them together served the buildings better. It was much more efficient. So there were a couple of different factors, but I think mainly the visibility portion is we were trying to keep it towards the center of the buildings to reduce the mass.
Yeah, and I guess if you can hold still, it seems like they're so looking at M2 as an example, you kind of have some of that M2 enclosure jutting out towards the front facade currently as compared to M1, and then it just seems so awfully kind of close to there that elongating it sort of on the horizontal and seems like it might be an opportunity to kind of meet multiple objectives or potential design objectives that we're talking around, a combination of minimizing views and integrating with forms that are complementary. So I think you can go in one of two directions there, especially if there's a strong likelihood of these mechanical screens needing to get taller based on future tenanting. Then looking at color and looking at integration with other forms that actually allow you to be purposeful with creating architectural interests with them, and or integrating them with other forms that are doing that might be the right strategy.
I think another thing that that the renderings do is the color is the same as the facade on M3, and I liked Emily's comment about the considering what color you're going to use for those screens. That I think you don't want those screens to feel like they're the same material as the facade. And from looking at the drawings, it seems like they are a different material. But I think you really need to study the color that you're going to put on them. Because I think you don't want those to be mistaken for part of the habitable part of the building. So just, I think taking into account all the comments and really trying, especially with that screen on M2, to pull it back and make it more linear, as Rebecca was suggesting. But that's
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
technical study to pursue with it.
So diving into some of the details, you're applying stucco to the existing CMU, or are you utilizing existing stucco? What's the strategy there?
It will probably be new stucco for the majority.
And do you have a sort of a specification for the finish that you're thinking there?
Not at this time.
Okay, that is something that we'll want to see in the material palette before proceeding. Generally, we aim for something on the smoother end. So we'll want to see that specification before public hearings. Similarly, where are you as far as looking at Parkflex versus Sequoia or natural cedar? Is there a possibility that you'll use sort of different things for different applications? Like what's the thought there?
I think it would be ideal to use the same material throughout. Our thought was some kind of thermally modified wood, so it had the longevity. It would still need to be maintained every couple of years, but that it did have that lifespan that we're looking for in a commercial building. It is possible that maybe we do thermally modified at the portal, like the vertical portions of the portals. Let me find. So, like for all of these panels, maybe we do that thermally modified, maybe for the actual portals themselves, maybe. Ideally, it's the same material. I wouldn't want to, because they're so close in terms of their adjacency, I wouldn't want to change that material between them.
Yeah.
So I think for now, we would say they're the same material.
Okay. Yeah, and I will say we've seen success with a lot of the Parkflex Perdima products and Akoya. I do wonder a little bit if cedar is going to gray out more than some of those other materials, which might be a concern. But similar to the stucco, I think our goal would be to have something that's our sort of starting point. So if Parkflex seemed like it was viable for the range of products, or Koya, whatever you go with, I think we could support one of those three, but we'd like one as a starting point to serve as the basis for further review. If product availability or other issues come up, we can consider an alternative that is comparable to that, but I think we want to narrow the lens there as far as what's being proposed as much as possible. A small detail on a detail is just making sure that you're identifying the extent of window recess for whatever conditions are around the project. That rolls into standard conditions of approval that these projects have, and just it adds assurance and clarity to what the proposal is, so we're not questioning what's what. But I think broadly what we're recommending today is continued refinement. I think you've shown some real success in the work that you've been doing with staff to the combination fin and frit concept on M2. Some further investigation of how you can pull additional texture detail and or glazing around to the rear of the buildings, zeroing in again more on the mechanical screens and how they fit into or differentiate from the building architecture further, and then again continued refinement of the paving concepts to maintain delineation of the crossings, but integrate more of that special detailing through the entry drive and refinement to the amenities in that linear, the linear park space, amenities and landscaping in the linear park space. I think those are, in addition to the material items that we just talked through, the key final recommendations of the DRC today. Linda, Emily, or Ella, is there anything that I might have missed or that you're remembering is one more point that you felt like we needed to talk with the applicant team about today?
Well, I think that you mentioned the road access control and pushing that back. I think this is a good rendering to show where the arm is. You can see the arm off to the right there. And it would definitely be much better if it's pulled back significantly so that it doesn't hit right where that large wrapping form is.
Right. Absolutely.
But that's something that I think that's should be easily accommodated. So I think that's good.
Okay, great. So with that, I feel a little bittersweet. We've got Emily new to us today, but the last virtual DRC meeting, it's been a run of about 3 years now of these DRC meetings. So it's going to be weird talking with folks in person and learning how to mark up drawings in person again. But thank you to the applicant team for the work you've done up to now, and the feedback and information you gave to us today. I think we're confident that you can resolve these issues in working with staff and don't need to come back to DRC with the solutions. So workshop some resolutions with staff and then scrub the plans for consistency throughout before public hearings. You can coordinate with Ella to dig into more of the weeds of how to effectuate those next steps offline, but she's your best resource and she can easily reach me. So with that, I will be adjourning today's final virtual DRC meeting, and we'll, I'm sure, talk with some complement of all of you again sometime in the not too distant future. So I hope everyone's well and stays well, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you
for your time
all.
and feedback.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
take care, everyone.